Okay, here's hoping that this is the last of these whiteboard-only lectures. I've got stuff set up here, borrowed some equipment from communications, and ideally we'll be able to do this from the comfort of my home. Today, we're going to review for the respiratory exam. So, respiratory renal acid base. You're going to find when this exam's on Blackboard, it's going to be shorter than your other exams. It takes a while to type these into Blackboard. Each question has to be individually. It's a little time consuming. With that, it's going to focus mostly on the big picture idea stuff we've already talked about. So we've got some topics that we need to cover. This exam is not designed the same way your other exams are. Because we're doing this solely online, this exam is more concerned with your ability to critically think about information rather than it's just to recall information. Because obviously, it's open Note, it's open book, it's open Google, whatever you got. There's no way for me to do anything. Now, your lab exam is going to show up eventually. Those take longer. Be patient. I'll get it there. It's going to involve diagrams, and then, like I said, they're more complicated to get on the blackboard. So here's hoping everybody's all right. Just as an update, at least one of your classmates has a positive diagnosis. I don't know what they're going through. I don't know their health status. Because of that, there's going to be a fairly large window for you to complete the exam when it comes up on Blackboard. Because by no means do I want to stress anyone out who's already under a high stress situation. You don't need to worry about recovering from an illness and taking an exam. Or your parents recovering from an illness, or your family member, or whatever recovering from an illness, or not recovering from an illness, and the anatomy exam. Take care of yourselves, take care of your families. If you need any time, if there's anything I can do, don't hesitate to ask. Just let me know. So, let's start, oddly enough, with respiration and what you need to know. All right. One of the things we talked about is you already know how respiration works. You know where oxygen goes, you know where carbon dioxide goes. Just remember that it's with a gradient. Things move with the gradient from high to low concentration. So oxygen's coming in. That means there's more oxygen on the outside than there is on the inside. It's moving from high to low concentration, high to low pressure. Partial pressure of oxygen on the outside of the body is higher than the partial pressure of oxygen inside, so it wants to come in, and the opposite is true for carbon dioxide. Remember our things that we talked about with the mechanics of breathing. In terms of the mechanics of breathing, changes in volume create changes in pressure. As volume increases, pressure decreases. That is inhaling. You already know this. When you inhale, your chest gets bigger. The volume of your chest cavity increases, pressure goes down. Gases move with the pressure gradient. If the pressure inside your lungs is lower than it is out of the body, air comes in. Air goes in when you inhale. This is why. Air goes when you exhale, because it happens. Some of the pressures that we talked about of importance are those pulmonary, transpulmonary, intrapulmonary, those sorts of things. Intrapleural. Things that you should remember. The intrapleural pressure. Pressure in the pleura. Always negative. This is what keeps the lungs inflated. If this ever equalizes with atmospheric pressure, the lung collapse. Lung collapse. Atelectasis. Atelectasis is collapse of the lung. So, critical thinking stuff. So here's you. Yay, you're happy. You're out of quarantine. Whatever. You decide to go to a public event. And this guy just happened to run in Michael Myers or whatever. Yeah, alright, so super happy. This dude stabs you. Alright. So you survived the stabbing, miraculously. But what's happening in your chest where you were stabbed? Lung. Expertly drawn. Quick, right lung or left lung? Right, it's the left lung. Because the left lung only has 2 lobes. Smaller than the right lung. Alright, so you're stabbed. And what we've done in that stabbing is we've ruptured the sac around the lungs, the pleura. And so now that intrapleural pressure is equal to the atmospheric pressure, which means that your lung is going to spring back up. It's going to collapse because this intrapleural pressure keeps the lungs inflated. It's always a negative value. And now you've ruptured that. So now it's a value of 0. So now your lung collapses. But because the stabbing was decent and he didn't nick this, he punctured the lung. What's going to happen is that air inside the lung is going to escape out here into the chest cavity. Well, now that it's in the chest cavity, it can't go anywhere. You can't exhale it. It's not in the lung. So it's trapped there. And your lung is going to keep collapsing. It's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller as air fills that. Yeah. Air in the pleural cavity is called pneumothorax. So punctured lung, atelectasis, or sorry, collapsed lung, atelectasis. Air in the pleural cavity, pneumothorax. Other pressures we hear about. Intrapulmonary pressure. This is the pressure in the actual alveoli in the lungs. This is going to fluctuate. When you inhale, it's negative. When you exhale, positive. The transpulmonary pressure is really the difference between the two. As transpulmonary pressure increases, the lungs are bigger. This will be an important thing later. More on that in a bit. All right. So now you're inhaling or exhaling, you're inhaling or exhaling. Gases move with the pressure gradient. Air is not just oxygen. Atmospheric air is like 79% nitrogen, like 21% oxygen. That means that of the 760 millimeters of mercury, it is atmospheric pressure, 21% of that came from oxygen. The rest of it came from nitrogen. So then how do we get oxygen in your blood? Oxygen is going to be dissolved in your blood. It's going to enter the bloodstream because we put pressure on it. And gases move with the pressure gradient. You need to know that carbon dioxide is more soluble than oxygen. So the partial pressure gradient for carbon dioxide isn't as high as it is for oxygen, even though they diffuse in equal amounts. In order to get oxygen and carbon dioxide in and out of the blood, we've got to go from the alveoli to the blood. We've got also here to here. This is the respiratory membrane. Respiratory membrane, three things. Type 1 alveolar cell, capillary, endothelium, endothelial cell, and diffused basement membrane. This is not much of a barrier at all. These are squamous cells. They're flat membranes, so thin it's going to allow oxygen to move this way, carbon dioxide to move this way, with their pressure gradient. So what happens if you have pneumonia? Well, if you have pneumonia, what's going to happen is that fluid is going to build up here. Now, while carbon dioxide could feasibly move through this, oxygen is not very soluble. It takes quite a bit of pressure to make oxygen go into your blood to begin with. There's no way to generate enough pressure to force oxygen through two cells and a fluid barrier. So, fluid built up there. You can't get oxygen to go in the blood. All right. Other things that we need to be concerned with here in the respiratory system. Let's say you're flying. It's in the future. And fly again. You're short. There's you. People behind you. Also ridiculously quick. Alright, so you're flying. You can tell you got a window seat. Everybody's flying. And we have this Lost moment where the plane cracks in half. You've seen Lost or whatever show where the plane cracks in half and stuff is getting out of the plane. People are going out, they're dying, they're flying out of the plane. Those stupid masks come down from the roof. Secure your own mask before securing the child's next to you. The masks come down in the event of a loss of cabin pressure, because as altitude increases, atmospheric pressure decreases. So the higher you get, the less atmospheric pressure there is. That also means the less partial pressure of oxygen there is. So there's not as much pressure forcing oxygen into your bloodstream. So that mass comes down because there's oxygen there, and that oxygen is going to be under pressure so they can push in your blood. Otherwise, you're going to pass out because there's not enough oxygen to force itself into your bloodstream, and you're going to become hypoxic pretty quickly. And then you're probably going to get sucked out of the airplane. At the same time, the opposite is true. As altitude decreases, pressure increases. And when you get underwater, you get water pressure. We talked about the whole scuba diving thing. Not super concerned with that at the moment. All right. Another thing we talked about is the oxygen disassociation curve. It's really hard to write with this. I'm not writing out disassociation. Oxygen curve. You get that. You look at the pictures in your slideshow. This basically tells us oxygen binding the hemoglobin and what disrupts that oxygen hemoglobin temporary bond, and that at even lower partial pressures of oxygen, hemoglobin is still nearly fully saturated. It takes a substantial drop in oxygen pressure for that to become the major important point. Carbon dioxide is the major respiratory stimulant. You hold your breath right now. You don't breathe again because you ran out of oxygen. You breathe again because carbon dioxide built up in the blood. When you're doing stuff, like right now, say you just ate, you're thinking really hard or whatever right now, there are organs in your body that demand more oxygen. They need more oxygen to make more ATP. You're not breathing harder and your heart's not beating faster. That's the nature of the oxygen disassociation curve. There's more than enough oxygen in your blood. If tissues need more oxygen, the conditions that those tissues create by being active cause more oxygen to let go of hemoglobin. Remember, in an active tissue, temperature goes up, carbon dioxide levels go up, pH goes down. All of those things cause oxygen and hemoglobin to separate. The more active a tissue is, the more you see those conditions, and the more oxygen will let go of hemoglobin, because active tissues need more oxygen. You should remember that most oxygen is carried in the blood bound to hemoglobin. Carbon dioxide is carried in the blood as bicarbonate. Most carbon dioxide travels in the blood as bicarbonate. Okay. Breathing oxygen dioxide Already know where oxygen and carbon dioxide go. There are a few factors working against you breathing. One is compliance. Basically, compliance is how stretchy your lungs are. Normally not an issue. Your lungs are super compliant. We don't worry. Unless there's scar tissue in your lungs, and then we have an issue. Normal physiology, not a problem. Next one is resistance. Resistance, by definition, is the opposition to the flow. The more resistance you have, the less airflow you get. Again, not really an issue because the normal airway is very large and branches off infinity times. The last thing we have here is the surface tension of fluid in the alveoli. Again, this is negligible because it's important. Type 2 alveolar cells make surfactant, and that surfactant reduces the surface tension of that alveolar fluid. Premature infants aren't making this surfactant yet, so quite often they'll have to be given synthetic surfactant because their bodies aren't making this surfactant yet, so the lungs stay collapsed. The fluid in the lung causes them to collapse on themselves. So these are our things that are working in opposition to moving air, and you'll notice none of them are really that significant in normal physiology. Now there's some pathologies involved, but for the normal person, there's not much opposition to airflow. It's very easy to get air to move in and out of your lungs, assuming there's no underlying pathology. Okay. All right, we're going to stop right here with respiratory stuff. I think if anything else, we'll come back to it, and shortly we'll move on to renal.